You have ordered a better clock so members will get notice. In fairness to members, I see the clock and I didn't realize nobody else could. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here today. And I appreciate your testimony, but it seems to me it's unfortunate that what you're saying in Washington is very different from what's happening with your examiners and regional supervisors on the ground, and from what I hear from them. And let me just give you a couple of examples. One of my constituents has said, overzealous regulators has swung the pendulum too far toward regulatory overkill, compounding the lack of available credit that otherwise would be available to the public. The bank regulators are forcing arbitrary write-downs on performing loans, excessively high loan loss reserve, capital and liquidity requirements. All of these actions reduce the amount of available credit that otherwise might be available. Every day, bankers are being told by their regulators to not make loans and, in fact, reduce their existing loan portfolios. The only viable and practical way to increase bank lending activities is to get the regulators back to a common sense and realistic approach in their examinations. And secondly, another bank, we've encountered an issue during our last exam regarding an unsecured loan that had always been and continues to remain current on its payments. Due to the lack of collateral and the borrower's tight cash flow, we had fully reserved for the loan. Thanks to our being so prudent, the examiners made us charge the loan off as a complete loss because it was fully reserved. So why not? Keep in mind we are receiving timely payments, but we can't return the reserves to capital. As payments are received for the loan, we have to wait until the full loan is paid off. And I've heard multiple times about this, and it's particularly the concern that they have is where they are asked to devalue a loan that they are receiving full payment on the loan and continuing. But they say, and the regulator will say, well, it's going to go down maybe next year, so you need to devalue it now. And then put that on top of the increase by the FDC in the assessments. You know, we're seeing so many banks that then their ratings are lowered. So if you could just briefly comment on that, maybe Ms. Duke or Mr. Dugan.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I hear the same stories over and over and over again, and we are incredibly focused on trying to run down specific instances to make sure that we're communicating with the examiner in the field to make sure that the examiner in the field knows what to do. That was one of the reasons there are so many examples in the commercial real estate guidance. And in fact, I sat down with examination staff and played the part of the banker, and we argued each one of those loans as if it were a loan in my bank. And I think we've got to communicate with it. And to the extent that you hear that from people in your district and you can identify who the regulator is, we would very much like to know the specific instances so that we can follow them up.
Good. When will we receive the results of the guidelines and the working that you've done recently? I mean, these, they're not old, but they're, not yesterday. Is this, you're going to see will we see a change in
It's very difficult to measure, and we're working on ways that we might be able to measure it, but we do have one sort of preliminary thing, and that is troubled debt restructurings, which are loans that have been restructured, shown on the balance sheets of the banks, increased 32% in the fourth quarter of 2009, and this guidance came out in October. So that's one very small encouraging sign that at least some workouts are taking place.
Okay. And there was one case, too, that I have where the field operator was okayed everything that they did, and then the supervisor came in and changed it, and that, taking away, the capital that they had. So I am concerned about that. Could anybody really define creditworthy? Is there a standard definition? You all mention it, but is there? Okay, well, I won't waste time then. Mr. Dugan, could you respond, and maybe Mr. Grunberg, to the question of the that I've been discussing?
Yes, to the more general question,
yes.
Not the definition of creditworthy. I agree with Governor Duke's remarks. We've spent an awful lot of time trying to walk through the individual examples with our examiners. And let me say, we've been spending time, not just now, but coming into the crisis, an awful lot of time dealing with and anticipating and then working with our examiners to work through those. I can't emphasize, however, enough, individual circumstances really do matter. Remember, we have a ton of banks failing now, and a number, the problem bank list of the FDIC is now up over 700 banks. And so you really do have to look hard at the individual circumstances to figure out which is places where there might be some undue stress in the examiner, maybe taking some issues, and others where the bankers are not realistically recognizing the problems that they're confronting.
I'm going to ask unanimous consent for 1 minute to the ranking member, and I just had a conversation. Ms. Bowman, you jogged our memory. You're right. This committee 3 times, twice under Republican majority and once under a Democratic majority, voted to give an additional 10% lending under the qualified thrift lender if it was to small business, that the additional 10%. We passed it twice through the committee, once through the House. We neglected to get to it. I just spoke to the ranking member, and we're going to give that very favorable consideration. And, yeah, I'm sorry, do you want to say something?
Mr. Chairman, what I would suggest is that the bill that passed provided that small business lending would be unlimited. There would be no cap on it. As you know, thrift.
Right. That may not be more than we can do,
Right.
but we will
Understood.
certainly increase. I think there's an agreement that we will, as we've done 3 times before. In fact, the ranking member was chairman of the subcommittee when it was done in the committee in one case. So an increase in the small business lending cap for thrifts will be given very serious consideration. I thank you for calling to us.